Thank you for joining me today. I'm Madelyn Blair, and this is Unlocked, a show all about unlocking the resilient leader in you. In our first show of this series, we explored the many things anyone and everyone should do well prior to their death, so that when it comes, the dying process is dignified, peaceful, and gentle. The second show talked about how to consider the dying process itself. How much care you want, what kind of care, who should be a part of the event. In each case, I so appreciated how Chris Palmer spoke without hesitation about details we often avoid, so that we can think about the event with care and without regret. Today's show begins when death occurs. We'll then rewind back to today, and Chris will talk about what it means to achieve a good life, the topic of one of his other books, Finding Meaning and Success. Finally, I've invited a counselor to join me to talk about grief. Chris Palmer is an author, speaker, wildlife filmmaker, conservationist, educator, professor, grandfather, and end-of-life activist. His work earned 2 Emmy Awards and an Academy Award nomination, and his films have taken audiences deep into the worlds of whales, dolphins, wolves, bears, and fragile ocean ecosystems. Chris takes his documentary approach to talk about the end of life. Welcome back, Chris.
Well, Madelyn, I am so happy to be with you, and I'm so grateful to you for having me on and talking about, this taboo subject of death and dying. And today is going to be particularly delicate because we're talking about what to do after you die, what to do with the body, and this is a kind of sensitive issue. We use the term body disposition, which is a rather infelicitous phrase. But anyway. I'm delighted to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it is such a pleasure. Well, you've opened the subject up. So, cultures across history have disposed of a dead body in different ways. I mean, some cultures burn it. Some cultures float it out to sea. Yeah. Some cultures, like us, mostly we bury. But there are other methods. Why should I even care about how my body is disposed of after I die? I mean, what are the factors?
Yeah, that is such a good question because, you might think, one of our listeners might think, well, once you're dead, what's it matter? But it does matter because it has cost effect. I mean, it's expensive. So that's one factor, is you don't want to burden your body with your heirs with a big expense. But most importantly, it has environmental impacts. And how you dispose of your body involves a lot of resources. I'll talk more about this in a moment. And then it has cultural impacts. I mean, you want to dispose of your body in a way which is consistent with your values, with the culture you come from. If you're Jewish, if you're Muslim, if you're whatever, you want to be comfortable with what you decide to do. You don't want to dispose of your body in a way which makes you say ick or yuck or So it has those multiple impacts. So that's why disposing of your body is an important decision, because it is impactful. In fact, it impacts your bottom line. It impacts your values, and it impacts the environment.
Okay, so then it's worthwhile to talk about. Well, I've been told that the body itself is not harmful to the earth. I mean, we have dead animals all over the earth all the time, and they don't seem to hurt the earth or even us. So what are the ways to dispose of a body so that it doesn't harm the earth, nor remain locked up in a concrete vault or something?
Yeah, well, you're right that it's not, the body isn't dangerous, but a little footnote to that. I mean, if the body has been embalmed, then the body will be full of carcinogens, formaldehyde and others, and that if that leaks into the water, so it's not completely true to say that the body is harmless. Depends what's in the body. If the body has had chemo and lots of things done to it, poisons put into it to combat disease, maybe it might not be safe to bury. So you have to get expert help on that. But in general, the you're right. The body isn't toxic, and can decompose naturally in the earth. But the way we normally do this, two ways, is flame cremation or fire cremation. This is where the body is incinerated at 1700 degrees Fahrenheit. It's very carbon intensive. It's very polluting. The mercury in the teeth gets evaporated, and it's got lots of negatives to it. It's equivalent to driving about 500 miles. So it's polluting and carbon intensive. So that's one way that we do it, and that's in fact becoming an increasingly popular way to do it.
Yeah.
But at the moment in this country, about 60% of people select fire cremation or flame cremation. By the way, I'm putting in that word fire or flame because in a moment later on in the conversation, I'll be talking about another type of cremation, water cremation. So I'm distinguishing water cremation from fire cremation. But when people normally talk about cremation, they're talking about fire cremation. That's what we typically mean by it. In fact, I have a crematory just about a mile from my home at the Pumphrey Funeral Home. So that's one way to do it. Another conventional way to do it is through burial, as you mentioned. And here the body is put in a heavy casket with stainless steel handles, and it's quite expensive. I read recently that President Trump, when he buried one of his wives, spent $120,000 on a casket. But that's exorbitant. I mean, a more typical price is $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000. But it's still expensive, and you put the body in this heavy casket, and then you bury it 6 feet down into a cement vault. So the whole premise is to somehow separate the body from the earth, so it'll stay protected, which is nonsense. Bodies all decompose. They will eventually go into the earth. I mean, eventually the coffin will break down, so eventually the body is going to return to the earth. So those are two ways, but they're both they're ways which I'm not very fond of because they are very carbon intensive, very polluting, very resource. They consume resources heavily. I mean, those caskets contain steel and velvet and high quality woods, which are basically just wasted. They're buried down. I mean, the resources in this country just are wasted in graveyards is, to me, shocking. So I will in a moment talk about 3 greener ways of disposing of your body, so we'll see how they contrast. But anyway, to answer your question, the conventional ways of body disposition are flame cremation and conventional burial, both not good, both expensive. The average price of a funeral now is $10,000, $12,000, $14,000. Cremation is less, but they both have expensive. They're both are carbon intensive and polluting, and consume excessive resources.
Okay. One question comes to mind. Well, 2 actually. One, of course, is what are the green options? And I think we can talk about that. But the other, before we touch on that, one of the reasons I recall that I was admonished that my parents should be embalmed was so that people could view them.
Yeah.
Now, the irony was we didn't have viewings for either of them. We had them in the church. There was a different way where you left the casket open in the church. People came and then it was closed and you went into the service. So I'm curious, what have you learned about this? Is that really the reason why people feel more comfortable doing this?
Well, I want to be. I'm opposed to embalming. But I want to be fair here. There are certain cultures, for example, in the African American community, where viewing the body is viewed as comforting,
Yeah.
and people benefit from it. So if people want it, they should have it. People should, I'm very much in favor of autonomy, agency, people doing what they want. If people want to be embalmed, they have every right to be embalmed. And But the main reason for embalming is it's profitable. Funeral homes make money from it. They want you to be embalmed because they make money from it. Um, and But I want to make a distinction here between embalming and prettifying. In other words, when you embalm the body, you basically eviscerate it. You get rid of all the gases and liquids inside, so it doesn't, and then replace it with formaldehyde and other embalming fluids, so that the um, uh, body won't decompose quite so fast. It's going to decompose, but won't decompose quite so fast. Um, but the other thing that funeral homes do is they prettify the face. In other words, this is not embalming, but they put eye caps on your eyes. They sew your gums together so your mouth doesn't droop open. They close your eyelids and they put makeup on, and they wash your hair and make your hair look like it was based on photographs. And so I want to make a distinction here, because that isn't really embalming. That's just simply making the dead person look a little more presentable. And so it's understandable that people would, you don't want to be looking at at a loved one with their mouth drooping open. So I understand. It's perfectly okay for somebody to say, for a few $100s, just please make my mum look a little more presentable. But they don't have to be the viewing thing. It's up to the family. I mean, some people want to look at the person, and if they do, fine. And some people have no interest in that. I do remember my nephew Georgie, when she saw my brother Timothy, was shocked by what she saw. They had put lipstick on him. It was just disgusting. And she said to him, and she said to me, I was just so horrified. He doesn't look like my dad. And she didn't know why they would do that. So I think funeral homes have a obligation to think carefully, and instead of just doing embalming routinely, which used to happen, they just assumed they would embalm. They should ask. They should say to the family, "Would you like your embalming? If you want them embalmed, we can do it, but you don't have to, because you can."
So this is a question you need to be ready to ask at those moments. Yeah.
I think so, because some people think embalming is in the law. It isn't. It is not. There's no law which says you have to be embalmed.
Okay.
And you can stop the body decomposing by cold temperatures, by refrigerating the body, and which is a much better thing to do. There are examples of funeral homes who have deliberately not brought in refrigeration into their property, so that they then say to the grieving family, "Oh, sorry, we have to embalm because we don't have refrigeration facilities." But it's better to refrigerate and to go to use a funeral home which is sensitive to this, and so on. So embalming, I'm against embalming. By the way, other countries view embalming as a bit weird. They think it's kind of a weird American habit. In England, where I come from, we view embalming as kind of this eccentric American thing that they love to do. But the way it came about, Madelyn, was through the Civil War. And I'm sure you and your viewers may know this, but prior to the Civil War, the way we disposed of bodies was very simple. Dad would die. His body would be brought into the parlor. He'd maybe washed. Family would come in. Neighbors would come in. There would be a little service, maybe a prayer, discussion, talk, jokes, humor, talking about family stories, and then the body would put in a simple coffin, and a wooden coffin, obviously biodegradable, and taken out to the church, local churchyard, or to the family property and buried down. It was very, very simple. That's what we now call green burial, which I will come back to when we talk about green burials. But back then the Civil War came. Young men were slaughtered. Families wanted to see them home. The only way they could get home is if they were embalmed. The embalming industry started, which is the basis of the funeral industry. And Jessica Mitford wrote a wonderful book about this, the way the funeral industry was exploiting and abusing grieving families, called The American Way of Death. I highly recommend it. But going back to the Civil War, so soldiers were slaughtered if they weren't too damaged, and often they were, of course. The slaughter was just horrific. 750,000 people died in the Civil War, 1861 to 1865, and it was terrible. But if the family could get their sons home, they liked that, because back then a good death was seen as, did the person look as though they were at peace and going to heaven, and they wanted to see that peaceful sleeping look on people's faces. So embalming began, and of course Lincoln was embalmed, and in 1862 Lincoln's son Willie, who died in the White House, was embalmed. Quite unusual, but Lincoln had him embalmed, and then he himself was embalmed after he was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. And on that long 2,000-mile journey, as you know, from DC to Springfield, it took 2 weeks. By the end of that 2 weeks, they could hardly keep his body together. I mean, he was embalmed, but his face, he was just falling apart. It was, but they did it, and he was buried in Springfield. But and then, as I say, the funeral industry began from that, but the trouble is the funeral industry. It has good people in it. I mean, they're not criminals, but they want to make a buck. They want to make money, and the way they make money is through upselling. Is saying to a grieving family, "Oh, your father was such a great man. You know, this $10,000 casket really is. Or here's even better. Here's a $12,000 casket, which really would show him at his best and be worthy of him." You know, I mean, they just want to. They're business people. They want to make money.
Of
so
course.
I don't blame them. It's just human nature. It's the American way.
Right.
But you'll notice when you go to funeral homes that the casket, the expensive caskets are on full display right at you, and the less expensive ones, the ones that cost $5,000 or $6,000, you'll find those buried away in the corner. You have to actually ask for them. So people should say to a funeral home or mortician, "Please show me your more moderately priced caskets, please."
Well, we also said we would talk about the green side of things. Wonder if you would just spend a few minutes and talk about that.
I will. So Madelyn, we've talked about conventional ways, conventional burial and flame cremation. So and they both have big disadvantages, as I've indicated. There are 3 new green ways of disposing of your body, which I highly recommend. The first one is simply a green burial, which is what we've discussed it already. Is what happened, is how we've disposed of bodies for eons. And my wife Gail and I are going to have a green burial. We're going to be buried in Reflection Park, which is 40 acres of wild land just outside Silver Spring. It'll cost us about $6,000 or $7,000 each, far less than the average price of a funeral. And our bodies will be wrapped in a shroud, or in a very simple bamboo or biodegradable simple wooden casket, put in there, and then carried out to a wild piece of land. The family will dig down 3.5 feet to where the microbial decomposition works most intensively, and then the body will be lowered to that depth and covered in earth, and it'll just slowly decompose their ashes to ashes. It's very, 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 very simple and inexpensive, very, very graceful, very, very dignified, very encouraging of family participation. I love that. One of the things I noticed when my parents died, my brothers died, was how it was just awful. The whole thing was awful, top to bottom. But one thing I noticed was how I and my brothers were, and how and family were kept out of it. We were pushed to the side. We basically handed over everything to professionals, to the church, to the and and so in a green burial, the family can carry the casket. And they can draw on the casket. The grandchildren can draw pictures like "Grandpa, I love you," and whatever, And so it can be very personal, and people then can put the earth on the. It can be very participative, which I think is incredibly important and healing and therapeutic. So anyway, so green burial or natural earth burial is one way. Let me just, before I go into the two other ways, let me just pause there, Madelyn, to see if you had any questions at this point on that.
I don't have questions. I'm excited, though, about the idea that this facilitates participative burial, so that indeed the members of the family, friends, can, if they choose to, really, including the young children, which I think is so important, that young children realize or learn, I shouldn't say realize, learn that death is simply a part of life. Not to be feared, it's just part of life.
Yeah, well said. Well said. I'm totally with you on that. And it also just to elaborate on the participation, it also allows more time. You don't have to hurry through the service and get out there in an hour. You can spend hours just talking, laughing, telling stories.
You can have your own Shiva around.
Yes, you're exactly. There's so much we can learn from Jewish traditions, and that's one of them. And
now there's another thing about another way to do green. You said there's a different kind of cremation, a water cremation.
Yes. Right. So this is called alkaline hydrolysis or water cremation or aquamation. All these words mean the same thing. Archbishop Desmond Tutu was a strong environmental advocate, strong advocate against climate change disruption. This is how he had his body dealt with. He asked that his body be reduced to ashes through alkaline hydrolysis or through water cremation. And what it is, Madelyn, is the body is put in a stainless steel container with water. That water has 5% lye, hence the alkaline hydrolysis notion. And over 14 to 16 hours, the body decomposes. If the bones are left there, then a cremulator is used, just with fire cremation. People often don't know this, but in fire cremation, the bones are often still there, and funeral cremators use what's called a cremulator to crush the bones. That's how you get the ashes. And you use a cremulator too, if you need to, in water cremation. And you get ashes. And then the liquid left over is very hygienic. There's nothing wrong with it. It's actually, you can dispose of it down the sink. It put just into the water disposal system. And so it's very gentle. It's very it's not expensive. It's about $6,000 to $7,000. It's very, very, I think beautiful. The gentleness is what really strikes me about it, compared to fire cremation, where you heat, incinerate the body at 1,700 degrees Fahrenheit. This is at a much lower temperature, and much lower temperature, and very, very gentle and beautiful. Anyway, so that is alkaline hydrolysis or water cremation. I highly recommend it. It's now legal in about 27, last time I looked, 27 states, including where you and I live, Madelyn, in Maryland, including in Maryland. And I lobbied for that, and Westmore signed the legislation, so it's now legal here, and facilities are now being planned and built. Would you like me to go on to the third method?
Well, I'm looking at the time, and I would rather we spend time on a couple of other things that that are around this issue of dying. So maybe you could just name it.
Okay. And I can do it. I can describe it in just in 30 seconds. So
Okay.
the third method is called human composting or natural organic reduction (NOR), pioneered by Katrina Spade on the West Coast. And so the body is simply put in a stainless steel container surrounded by wood chips and straw and alfalfa, and over 4 to 6 weeks, it decomposes and converts into a square yard or 600 pounds of beautiful, rich, fertile soil. So human composting is you convert the body into soil, and that soil you can put under trees or roses or plants or anything. You can do anything like with it.
All right. Well, I think we have disposed of this body. I just want to touch on these gently, because I really do want to spend time talking about that final thing of a good life. And that is that part of this final act involves some kind of memorial service or service, and that includes a eulogy. So I wonder if you just touch on a couple of things that you've learned about what makes them effective and things that people should think about.
Yes, I talk about this, of course, in my book, Achieving a Good Death, and so the thing to do with a eulogy is to keep it to 5 minutes, certainly not more than 15, but 5 is fine, and write it out. Don't ad lib. Don't ad lib, write it out, and then don't talk about yourself. Talk about the deceased. A lot of people make the mistake of talking about I, and no, you want to, and then talk about the person's qualities, their character, what they accomplished in their life, how loving and considerate they were, if they were, and you can be candid. I mean, if they were alcoholic or abusive, it's good to say, look, my father was abusive, and we can't hide that. But later on, he made up for it. He was a fantastic grandfather, and he apologized to me. I mean, in other words, you don't want to be so candid that you embarrass people. You don't want to be so candid that it's awkward. No, but you want to be candid so that you can be authentic, and people listening can say, okay, well, this person struggled. We all struggle. We all make mistakes. We all have regrets. And this person, got abused substances at one time in his life, and that was, but he got over it, and he grew from it, and learned. So I mean, I think I would encourage people to be candid. You don't have to make it. You don't have to make other persons all roses and candy and rainbows. No life is like that.
No.
So
well,
I think
I have to tell you, I had to do the eulogy for my mother. Now, I was very close to my mother. So for me, doing 5 minutes was a lot, because you have to write it, but then you have to rehearse it so that you can say it without breaking down.
Right.
I mean, you get choked up, but you can't stop.
Yeah.
And that's what so I advise anybody that if you're assigned that, Chris is right, write it down and then rehearse it a little so that you can actually say it.
Yeah, that's very good advice. And say it slowly. I mean, you don't have to rush through it. I usually listen to a eulogy where the person just gabbled, and it's hard to pick any words out. So talk slowly, and with a lot of feeling, and it's fine to break down. I've given a number of eulogies, and every time I break into tears, but people understand, and then you just regain your composure and keep going, and people completely understand. There's nothing wrong with that at all.
I had to say one more story.
Yeah.
I went to a very special birthday party. This was not a death. This man had just turned 100.
Oh, wow.
And all of his grandchildren, and he had quite a few, spoke, and they were allowed to say one thing about their grandfather that they liked. And I sat there and I thought, now that is a perfect eulogy.
Yeah.
And they just got up, said it was, and the next, and the next. And it was beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very precious. I love that. I love that because it reminds me to say something else that in a memorial service, it's good to have, I think, lots of participation. When my parents died, my brothers died, just the priest got up and he didn't know them and just said a few
Yeah,
quotidian, mundane, banal words. And the only thing of any humanity in the service was my eulogy. I mean, the rest of it was just the rest of it was just. You
exactly
know,
the same with my
yeah,
mother's funeral.
yeah, yeah. No, it's very disappointing. So I think the ideal memorial service, or religious, non-religious, anything can be anything. But I think it's great to have participation, have those little grandchildren get up and say a word, and and yeah. So I think the more meaningful and emotional and candid and purposeful the memorial is, the better.
Yeah, gets that healing of the event.
It's an important part of the grieving process. That's
Correct.
right. I agree. I agree.
Well, okay. I think it's time that we talk about that other aspect that you wrote on so beautifully in finding meaning and purpose.
Yeah.
Success, sorry.
Yeah.
Ah, good. You have that book because I only have the achieving. I only have the achieving.
Yeah. I've written 10 books, so it's hard to keep track of them all.
I understand. I understand. So let's spend the rest of our time on this. One of the things you introduce is what you call the three-legged stool. So
Yeah.
you want to start there wherever you want. We've got about 8 minutes for this.
Yeah. So I suppose I should start with the question: what is a good life? And a good life has nothing to do with the size of your house or your car or if you have a boat or not. That is totally irrelevant. A good life is all measured by what kind of person you are. You were, if you were kind, if you were considerate, if you helped others, if you were loyal, if you were a good family member, if you went out of your way to assist people when they were down, all these types of all these types of basic values like kindness and generosity and courage and so on. So that's what a good life is. And you ask me, what how one goes about it. Well, I think Madeline, what's critical here is that people have a vision of what their life should be, and this is articulated in a credo or a personal mission statement. And people can go to my website, which is Chris, I think you have it somewhere, chrispalmeronline.com. People can go to my website and see I put my personal mission statement there. People can see it and people can use it if they want to as a template. But anyway, if you want to know, if some of your listeners may be thinking, what personal mission statement, credo, what is that? What does that mean? So you can go to my website, chrispalmeronline.com, and see one. But what it is the Bible says, without a vision, the people perish. And I think that even though I'm not a religious person, I think that's really true. And so I think people need a credo, and that's the first leg of the stool, a vision, a personal mission statement. When I was in my 20s, Madeline, I was very unhappy. On the surface, I looked successful. I was in the British Navy. I was getting degrees. I had lots of friends, went to parties, blah, blah, blah. But I was deeply unhappy, and I wondered why. And one day I had this slap to the forehead epiphany that the reason is that I didn't know what I was living for. I mean, what was I ready to die for? I was just living very superficially on the surface of life. And what I realized was that if I wrote down in words what deeply mattered to me, then I could begin to get a grip on what a good life might consist of. So I started writing, and after 5 years, I was able to produce something which I was somewhat satisfied with, a personal mission statement. And for the last 50 years, I'm 78 now, I've been constantly adding to it, changing it, editing it, improving it. And people can find that on my website. And so So that's the first leg of the stool, is having a vision for your life, so you know what your life's about. What are you here for? It articulates what your values are, what your purpose is, what you find meaningful. And then the second leg of the stool is goals rooted in that vision. Goal rooted in that vision. And the rooting in the vision is important because you want things to hang together. You don't want just you don't want to be a person who says, "Oh, I want to climb Mount Everest," or "I want to publish a poem," or "I want to get along better with my alienated sister," without it having any without it being based on anything more fundamental, more foundational. That's where the vision is. So you have a vision, and then you create goals based on that vision. And then the third leg of the stool is taking action based on those goals, rooted in those goals. Vision, goals, action are all come together. And I call them the three legs of the stool, because if one of them is missing, the stool's going to fall over. You need three legs for the stool to stand up, for a life to stand up. And if any one of them is missing, because we all know people who are crazily busy, 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 rushing, 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 but they don't have any sort of goals, and so the business is just business. It just doesn't get you anywhere. And we also know people who have grand visions of a life. Yes, I want to be, prime minister of England or something, but they don't take action, and so nothing ever happens. So they don't ever achieve their goals. You need all three goals: vision, goals, all three legs of the stool. Okay, so let me pause there for further questions from you. But that's the fundamental essence of what I mean by a good life, is having a vision and having good values and living a good life, a life based on helping others, on generosity, on kindness.
Well, I certainly like that list of your values there. Often when I'm working with people, they're trying to make a decision. And we always spend time to talk about what their values are. They may value excellence or elegance or beauty or something. And I said, fine, now let's take that and work from there, because every decision you make, if it is rooted in those values, it's the right decision.
Yeah.
If you start deviating from that, then there's no root. So it
Yeah.
doesn't get fed and you can't move forward.
Yeah.
It really helps a lot of people. I know it's helped me, because once I understood and I know why I'm supposed to be here. I know my reason. I've often talked about it actually on the show. I know that I'm a gardener, full stop. Only I don't just garden flowers, I garden people. So, but the other question that comes to mind, and you comment on it if or not, it doesn't matter. A lot of people come to say they're 50 or 55 and they see retirement on the horizon. And they say, but none of my goals, my goals are either achieved or not when I get there. What are things you think you thought of? Obviously, you've gone through that. How did you shift your goals when you saw that?
Well, the first thing I think to say, Madelyn, is that none of us should use the word retirement. Retirement is a terrible word. When we retire, what we're actually doing is switching from one set of activities and goals to another. We don't retire. We take on new activities. We take on new things. That's what we should do. So I encourage people to approach retirement with as much intentionality as they used when they were working. When they were working as a lawyer or accountant or an educator, whatever. When they had when they were in their career, what did they do? Their boss would ask them to set goals, and would ask them what, if they were happy and enjoying their work and so on. And they took it very serious. They had to take it very serious if they were to survive as a lawyer, as an accountant, as a politician, whatever. You have to live very intentionally. So we need to take that same serious approach to retirement. Not think of retirement as playing golf and and watching television. That's a terrible, terrible squandering of potential. So retirement is a very important time to renew your life, to come up with fresh, exciting goals. I'm going to make new friends. I'm going to join the local gardening club. I'm going to cycle more. I'm going to get fit. I'm going to really spend time with my grandchildren and nurture them. I'm going to make up and solve that problem of not talking with my estranged sibling. I'm going to solve that problem. Set goals so I encourage people to take when they get to 50, 55, that don't retire. Don't think about watching television. No. Don't do any of that stuff. Rather, be ambitious. Think about big goals. I am going to get along with my estranged brother. I'm going to keep a journal. I'm going to nurture my grandchildren and help them learn French, whatever. You know what I mean?
Chris, as I'm listening to you, I'm really struck. We tend to think that our work is our life. And then we see work stopping. We don't realize that this is when you can, they think that living is the golf course or whatever. And there are people who love that. Hey, you should do it. But there's so much more to what you can do in life.
And Madelyn, let me just say, look at you as an example. I mean, you are so productive and busy and doing great things. So you set a good example for the rest of us. I hope I do the same in my life. We as we get older, we need to live with great intentionality and have big exciting goals.
Yes. There's a reason why human beings live past their reproductive years. I mean, let's get over it and really use that time.
Yeah.
Chris Palmer, this has been such a pleasure. Oh my goodness. I'm almost sorry that we finished.
I'm so delighted to have done this with you, Madelyn. I hope you'll have me back again. And you raise such good questions. And I love the conversations we've had. I hope the listeners have got something out of it. I hope they'll go to my website, chrispalmeronline.com. There are lots of free handouts there and all sorts of things they can help themselves to it, and I hope people will get my book, Achieving a Good Death. And thank you again for having me, Madelyn.
You are so welcome. Every now and then, there is something that changes how I think about the world. Grounds for Thought is a place where I talk about these moments so that you can explore the meaning for yourself. As I thought about the work that Chris Palmer has done on achieving a good death, I knew that grief is its own thing. I recalled Krista Rizzo's wonderful conversation here on Unlocked 2 years ago about grief, where she spoke about it. She said, when it comes to grief, you can't tell me how to feel. It's the name of her book. Each of us has to grieve our own way. Then I learned about Kelly Edmondson's work on grief. Kelly Edmondson, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so appreciative of the time to speak about this really critical issue for all of us.
Well, most people think grief support ends, with the funeral or maybe the luncheon afterward. From your experience, where does grief actually begin and end? And what do people get wrong about that timeline?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think there are two things that we get really wrong consistently. The first is there really is no timeline. So despite our societal convention that 3.5 days are the number of average bereavement days that people get, 3.5 spouse, child, mother.
The company gives you that time. Is that what you mean?
Correct.
Okay.
Grief is unpredictable. It is an ongoing journey. And in general, with a close loss, people have a before and after persona. It's cyclical, right? You have good days where you think, happy today, I have joy today. And then you hear a song, you see someone who reminds you, and it can come flooding back. And nothing about that is pathological. It's the normal process of grief. It's ongoing, it's cyclical, and it's okay.
And it's okay.
The other thing that I would say people get wrong is that as a society, we want to be very polite around grief.
Mm.
And so we're afraid to maybe mention or have someone remember that they're living in a grief experience.
Mm.
And so what I would say, not only as a professional, but as a bereaved mother, there's not a day I don't know that my son's gone. Every day, that's a reality. But there is no greater joy. There's not a word in the English language that is more beautiful to me than his name. So I love stories, memories. I love to hear the name Darius. It is the essence of keeping his legacy alive. So say their name.
That's beautiful. That's really, really beautiful. Well, what happens in those months after the initial support fades? What are the real consequences when people are expected to be back to normal?
In the workplace, the evidence and the research is clear. In the immediate post-loss phase, people are at greater risk for leaving an organization,
Wow.
for unexplained absences, decreased productivity, and decreased engagement. Those are facts. The reality is those things are true in their lives as well, right? And work is a part of our lives. And so people are generally less interested in social engagement. They may have less joy in routine activities. And so we certainly carry that over into our workplaces. Another thing that we found is people, again, are afraid to bring it up. They're afraid that in the workspace, if I ask you, I know this Thanksgiving's different. What are your plans? But that really provides space for people to bring their reality and their whole selves into the workplace. It's a beautiful model, helping the leaders frame the loss. Employees, our clients, patients in the healthcare environment, right? Their absence can be very loud. And if we don't address that, if we don't find ways to reduce the secondary trauma of the people who have to come back into that workspace, what it signals is that it's not safe to feel that way and that we're not caring for the whole you. And so these frameworks where leaders are invested in and given a new skill set, which we know doesn't exist broadly in society, is really important in helping people manage unexpected, unanticipated, and sometimes anticipated loss, which we will all see at some point at work.
You speak of remembrance over avoidance and long-term compassion over short-term sympathy. But what does sustained presence actually look like for an individual, a leader, an organization over that first year?
It's checking in the next month to say, listen, you've returned to work, you've been back a month. How are things going? Is there anything I can do as your leader, as your colleague to make things easy? Are there things that are incredibly difficult for you right now? You think about things like the life changes that happen. People lose their spouses, they have to find new childcare arrangements. It's important to make space for people to have these conversations, which many of the people who are closest to them may not be comfortable having. And so sustained presence is a calendar of check-ins. One of the leaders that I work with actually has set every 6 weeks with their bereaved employee, someone who lost a daughter, one of the most intimate losses that you could have. Every 6 weeks, they have a coffee date. And that date is really just to talk about Jessica and their memories of Jessica and how they're navigating Jessica's loss and how in their grief state, work fits in to their new life. That's what presence is. It's bringing the conversation forward. It's not offering solutions. It's not offering advice. The truth is we can't fix grief, but what we can do is sit with someone in it and allow them the space to share their story.
Here's my final question. Why and how do you offer help in the grieving process?
Yes. My why is really based on not just my clinical experience. As a frontline nurse, I was a trauma and emergency department nurse. I saw grief in its most raw form. Upon notification, mother lives, the most rare moments that I had the blessing to share space with. But as a grief counselor and a bereaved mother, I've seen sequela of those moments. And what I found is we just don't do it well. What if we created a movement, a culture, where we didn't just help someone say goodbye, but we helped them figure out how to navigate the new realities of a life without their loved one? And it's become a passion. I had colleagues, loved ones, and close friends who showed up in a way for me that I know is abnormal. When I needed someone to just sit and listen, my sister would stay on the phone for me for 30 minutes at a time, not saying a word, but being there. When I was coming back to work, I had a leader that said to all of my colleagues, Kelly's back and she's different. And we're going to recognize and acknowledge that upon her return. I have a husband who allowed me to check out of daily activities for as long as I needed to, without judgment, without fixing it. That presence helped me figure out a way to heal, helped me devise a plan for keeping my son's legacy alive. And I decided everyone should be afforded that opportunity. So when people come to me, we can offer grief counseling and support through the process, but I can also offer leaders a framework to help their teams understand the process, to show up better for their employees, for their clients, for themselves, and offer a tangible way to make compassion present. That's what we do. That's our commitment. And it has not only changed my life trajectory, but it has changed the way that I keep my son Darius alive for years to come.
It's a beautiful story. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me today. This has been a series on a topic that is rarely given this much time. Yet it is something that touches not just the breadwinner, not just the leader, not just the parent, or even the child. This topic touches all of us. Along with all of his facts and information about this subject, I so appreciated Chris Palmer's words that a good death is one that is dignified, gentle, and peaceful. I also appreciated the words of Kelly Edmondson, that no matter how grief affects us, it's normal. I hope this conversation has given you greater ease as you consider death of others in your life and yourself as well. I know for myself, I now have a list of things that I want to do to make sure that I achieve that dignified, peaceful, gentle death. This series has been a labor of love from me to you. If you have found it valuable, please grab my email address and email me of what you found useful. And if you're watching on my YouTube channel, add a comment below the video, telling what you valued about the program or the series. I cannot express how much I appreciate this kind of feedback. Many, many thanks to you, my remarkable audience. I'm Madelyn Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock your resilient leader.